going?
Yes, let's start. We do have a couple of new folks joining us today, maybe Kyle or somebody else, but let's start. It's time. Um, Peace, salam, and shalom. Welcome to the second class of Spring 2023 Interfaith Explorations hosted by Interfaith Center. I am Sophia Said, your host and moderator for this class. I'm the executive director of the Interfaith Center, which is sponsoring the class series. Our classes are co-sponsored by the Cobb Institute in California, named in the honor of the founder, John Cobb, and also co-sponsored by the Center for Process Studies. Our main text or resource for our classes is Spirituality and Practice website that I send it to you in our weekly email. And along with me is my friend and our teacher, distinguished professor, Dr. Jain McDaniel, who has taught religion for over 30 years and helps students think about religion and different religious point of views in a way that they can create and form and develop their own philosophies and theologies. I appreciate it so much, but I really think that I have not taken enough use of my friend. So I have decided that from this class, I will do less talking and Jay will do more talking. And he will be teaching both the letters instead of I am taking one and Jay is taking one. So with that, I think we should start. I'll say a word about spiritual literacy, actually. Our interfaith explorations is the primary purpose is to enhance our spiritual literacy by learning specific activities or spiritual exercises that help us deepen our own relationship with the sacred and with the world around us. And that starts for me basically first to become actively engaged with my own self, with my own experiences and the breadth of my experiences, and then extending it to the rest of the world. So in last class, we did two letters. Jay presented to you A for attention, and I presented to you B for beauty. I really hope you kept those letters with you and you use them and practice them throughout the week, and they allowed you to walk in beauty with grace. And they invited you to deepen your attention and notice the signs of spirituality and grace and spirit all around you. And if you missed that session, we have it recorded. Go to our YouTube channel and watch it. With that said, we have two spiritual qualities that we'll be focusing on today. They both start with C. C for compassion and C for connections. And both of them will be presented and covered by Jay. And with that said, Jay, I want to give it to you.
Well, thanks, Sophia. And the fact that I'm presenting both letters today, I think I'm going to try to convince Sophia to come back and do letters, but we'll keep that to ourselves. I love Sophia's teaching, but I will take both letters today. And I'm going to start with C for connection. And I think I'll begin with a story, and then I'm going to ask you some questions. I did teach for 39 years at a liberal arts college. And I taught a course called Contemporary Ideas of God. And in my early days, Alan, you may have taken that course. I don't know. And I have to admit that I was proud of myself because I thought that I had identified 16 ways of thinking about God. And I would go into the class and here's one way. And then the next week, here's another way. And the next week, here's another way. And I would draw diagrams on the blackboard. And I thought I was really giving my students options. So I wouldn't come out in favor of one or the other. I just say, here's one way, here's another way, here's another way. And at the end of the course, one of my very favorite students came up to me after the last class. And she said, thank you, Dr. McDaniel. I've really learned a lot from this course. And of course, I was pleased to hear her say that. And I said, what did you learn? And she said, I learned that I'm not interested in God. I'm interested in relationships. And when she said it, she said, tell me more. I'm interested in relationships with other people. I'm interested in relationships with the natural world. That's where I find the sacred. I don't find the sacred in ideas of God, especially when drawn on a blackboard. And I learned a whole lot from that student. And then the more I thought about it, the more I realized that many people I know would say exactly what she said. And so in my mind, I began to draw a distinction, and I want to introduce it to you. We'll see if it helps. Between two experiences of the sacred. And I'm going to call one the vertical sacred and one the horizontal sacred. Now, the vertical sacred, and you can have them both, is a sense that there's something more than you, than the world, than the universe. It may be beyond you, it may be inside you, it may be both. You may think of it as the source of all that is. You may understand it in personal terms. You may address the vertical sacred as he or she. Or you may think of it more as an it. But it is more than you in a very important sense, the vertical sacred. The horizontal sacred is what my student was talking about, relationships. And for her, that was the heart of where the sacred was. So I began to ask people, are you more interested in the vertical sacred or the horizontal sacred? And many people, of course, you can guess, would say both. And many people would say, I find the vertical in the horizontal and the horizontal in the vertical. I get that. But I think C here is an invitation for us to really focus on the horizontal sacred, on relationships per se. And let's bracket the question of God, the vertical sacred. Just for the moment, let's just think about how important relationships are to our sense of spirituality. So then let's get concrete. Think of some of the kinds of relationships that inform your life, my life. One is friendships. And so just to think that the power, the beauty of friendships have in your life, where would you be without them? And there may be one or two that are especially important to you. Where would you be? Where would I be without them? Another for many people is family. A spouse or children or parents. Your very soul is shaped by those relationships. Now, they can be healthy or unhealthy or anywhere in between, but they help make you you, and you wouldn't be you without them. Another kind of relationship I'll call community. Ramadan begins tonight or tomorrow. There will be a gathering of community in the mosque, a togetherness. It's more than family. It's also more than friends. There may be people in that community that you're not exactly friends with, but they're part of the community. They're part of the larger family. So that takes you to think about churches, synagogues, mosques, civic clubs, interest groups, community. As Sandy knows, I do volunteer work in memory care units. I did it yesterday. In those moments, we're community. In those moments, we're together. So community as a context for relationships. I'm going to keep mentioning some. There's also community with the more than human world. You may have pets. You may have a dog, a cat, or you may be bonded with other kinds of animals, horses. Those are relationships. You wouldn't be you without them. They nourish your soul. There can be a relationship with the earth, with soil, with plants, with oceans, with the sky, with stars. If you garden, you probably have a special relationship with soil and plants. It's part of your spirituality, the gardening itself. Alan Eason among us has rather deep experiences with Lakota traditions, native traditions. You know that native traditions have a rich sense of all my relatives, all my kin, not just the human. Many people also have a sense of relationship with what I'll call the nation and or an ethnicity. I'm Pakistani. I'm American. I'm French. I'm Brazilian. Those can be healthy or unhealthy. Hyperpatriotism is probably unhealthy, but a sense of bondedness with a really larger community of people, probably pretty healthy. As long as we don't draw sharp boundaries of us versus them. The more you think about it, you can have relationships with ideas too. They can really be important to you. You can have relationship with dreams. You go to sleep at night and a whole world appears. So in the house of relationships, there are so many rooms. And you can almost hear somebody arguing, it's the whole of it. Relationships are everything. You can also have a relationship with yourself. You know, if you don't like yourself, you don't love yourself, that's a really hard one. People can suffer from difficult self-relationships, or you can kind of hide from yourself or not know yourself. So I think C is a really, really big one. And I'm going to call it the horizontal sacred. And I think the question I'd like to ask you is, would anybody like to lift up a kind of relationship that you think is especially important to you, and just lift it up for our consideration? And then I'm going to ask a question after this about the role of digitality in relationships today. Digital communities. You're in one right now. I am too. But let's set that aside for the moment. Anybody want to lift up a kind of relationship that you have found especially important? And you just kind of want to say that. Friend, family, house of faith, whatever. I'll start with Nita because I know I can get her talking. Nita, you have lots of relationships with people. I know that, but you also have relationship with land.
I do, but the one I was thinking of most was my relationship with the owls. I have a pair of great horned owls that live in the cliff behind our house. We live in the country on a lake. And I have named these owls Eleanor and Franklin, and have come so fond of them that even when they bear offspring, I name them Eleanor and Roosevelt's children's names. But they talk to me almost every day. They accompany me during the night in my dreams and then in reality. And I wake and am eager to go outside before the sun goes into full shining, so that I can meet with them. And I always get messages from them. And so I have a wonderful relationship with the owls. I've even learned their language, and I hoot back to them. So some of my neighbors worry about me. But yes, owls are in all kinds of natural order of things, birds of all sorts in the land, rivers, the lakes. It's all part of my spirituality.
Did you say you hoot back?
I do.
Hey, you know what? I just can't not chime in just a little bit. I have a hoot flute that Becca gave me for Christmas, and it's
actually, Len, you're here, yeah.
Yeah, I just came in, and not in time to hear about the owls. I've got a pair of barred owls in our backyard that come regularly, and I've got an actual owl call. So it's been really interesting, the relationship that is developed with them, particularly Al, Al the owl. And it just really, for me, opens up, it's kind of a window into the broader community that we are all a part of, and a kind of experiential sense of awe that we can feel connected. And I anthropomorphize some of the experience, but there also is something generally or genuinely going on that has to do with curiosity, it seems like, and respect. So
thank you, Lynn.
Yeah,
it's great that you're here too.
Good to be out of the hospital.
I know you've been in the hospital a good bit these days, so welcome home in every respect. Now, anybody else want to lift? Right now we're on owls, and I bet we can stay there for 2 more days. There's enough there. But David, do you have another kind of relationship you want to lift up?
I do. My relationship with some of my educational and professional mentors, some long have gone on and some are still part of my life actively. Even the ones that have deceased are part of my life, who really through the years gave me the chance at the intellectual life, the social life, just who I am. Like you said, they're integral to who I am and my sense of what's important. And I just wanted to lift that up.
One of the letters in the alphabet is T for teachers. And if you expand that a little bit to include mentors, guides, those are very critical to us. And that reminds me of that. Anybody else want to lift up something? So we have owls and we have mentors. Anybody else want to lift up something that's in this plane that's nourished you in a very important way?
Jay, may I make a comment on, you talked about vertical connections and horizontal connections. So I would like to comment on that, because in my life, I think that my quest for spirituality always have started with horizontal connections and deep connections. And I feel that actually spirituality for me is an art of making connections. The deeper the connections are, the deeper my relationship, the deeper the horizontal connections are, the stronger the vertical connection becomes. And since you talked about mentors and teachers, it reminds me of a Sufi tale from Rumi, that once there was this young man who came to Rumi and asked him for permission to stay at his madrasa, or what would you call, institute, and become a disciple, and asked Rumi to take him as a disciple. And that was the tradition in olden times. We didn't have the structure of an 8 to 5 school or university. Students who wanted to be seekers or disciples would go to the teachers and live with them and learn with them while living with them. So Rumi asked him that, have you ever opened your heart to somebody? Have you ever loved a woman in your life, or anybody else? Have you ever fallen in love in your life? And he thought about it and he said, no, I've never fallen in love in my life. And Rumi sent him back. He said, you're not ready. You're not ready yet. Go back to your life and find somebody to deeply fall in love with. And then after that experience, I will consider taking you as a disciple. Which reminds me of this, again, art of making deep, deep connections that you talked about, because for a lot of us, especially Sufis, our spirituality is dependent on that, because our relationships, as we all are talking about, are those labs where we practice the spiritual and the spiritual qualities that we're trying to learn. So just wanted to share the story there of the importance of deeply connecting with people around us, and how it helps us to open our heart towards divine as well.
You know, that's so interesting, Sophia. The greater the horizontal, the greater the vertical. I think is that right? Is that what you're saying there?
Yeah, the stronger the horizontal network,
the stronger, yeah,
relationship are. It's an exercise for the heart muscle to learn to open up and give to others around us. And the more we work the heart muscle with people around us, the easier it is to find divine in them. Because where do we find divine? God is not going to come and stand in front of us and reveal God's self to us. I mean, we find divine in these deep connections and relationships. For me, personally speaking.
Yeah. No, thank you. Dan.
Yes, I'd like to build on what Sophia was saying and suggest that really the strongest connection we can have is with the divine. And that can be both vertical and horizontal. One of my mentors was a very wise man back in my youth by the name of Daniel Jordan, who had a doctorate in music education and theory and another doctorate in human development. And he developed his own theory of educational development. But one of his major contributions was writing a pamphlet that I keep to this day, Becoming Your True Self. And in it, he talks about the image in which we've been created, the image of God in which we've been created. Certainly it's not the painting on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, but it's his qualities, his attributes. We can call them virtues, which have been planted in our hearts. And so we can connect to the divine by finding the reflection of his qualities in our being and then acting them out. And that's how we combine spirituality and practice, by identifying these virtues that are gifts from God and finding ways to live them out so that they inform our actions, our thoughts, our beliefs, to develop ourselves, but also to contribute to the world that we're a part of. And that framework of seeing the reflection of God in ourselves, in our fellow human beings, in the rest of creation that came from the same source. All those connections are available by identifying the qualities of God that are reflected therein.
So Dan, what I want briefly for us to think about before we turn to compassion, or invite us to, is you have a deep sense of the connection between the vertical and the horizontal. As you talk about your relationships with others, that's also a relationship with God in some way. And I certainly understand that That's kind of where I am personally. But I would like for us to attend to those who say, I just don't get this God thing. I'm not there. That's not my language. That's your language, but it's not mine. And if you imagine this person, maybe they grew up with an image of God that was excessively authoritarian, a bully in the sky, maybe it was that. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just, that's not where I am. I don't connect with that language. But I do find something sacred in relationships, per se. Yeah. I guess what I want to ask is, what do we make of that? Is that a viable form? Does that? Let's see what other people think. What do you make of the person that says, no vertical for me, it's all horizontal? Thank you very much.
Just
what do you make of that?
Quick response before.
Okay.
I had another wise teacher in my youth who encouraged us to embrace people of all beliefs, whatever their system, even those, quote, of non-belief. And in regard to people who expressed a difficulty understanding God and would describe what they didn't believe in, he would say, you know what, I don't believe in the same God you don't believe in. And through humor, created a linkage. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Anybody else want to speak to this question of being horizontal but not vertical? Ellen.
So there can be 50 Jews in a room, and we don't know who among them are believers in God or not, but they are often believers in the community. And an example that I could talk about, I had an experience, well, multiple experiences, but here's one example of that. Having gone to a conference of Jewish educators, I want to say there were 200 people in this room in Colorado at a beautiful retreat area. And we were doing a Friday night service together with melodies that were the kind of melodies that are contagious. So you don't know the melody when it starts, but by the time this crescendo of this melody, singing prayer, so it was prayer, but the melodies, when people were singing together and stamping their feet and clapping their hands, and I don't want to say it was like a revival, but it was a time when people were connecting with each other, with the people who were around them, and the music that was going on. There was something, I want to say, spiritual and magical about that my friend who was with me 20 years ago, this happened, and she and I still talk about this experience of how we were lifted up and how being surrounded by people who think like us to some extent, but I didn't know them necessarily, so I don't know exactly, but we were all feeling the same thing at the same time. So the relationship of Kehillah, of community at this time, was something that we've carried with us, Marcia and I have carried with us all this time. And I refer back to it when I'm wobbly in terms of what I feel about my relationship with God. But this helps me be centered in that. So I'm saying that because there are many people in that room who don't necessarily have a relationship with God at all, but do with the Jewish people and the peoplehood and the community of that. And that's okay. I mean, everybody, does what they need to do. Am I addressing what you were?
You are, okay. Ellen. I have many Jewish friends that will say I'm not religious, and they mean they don't have a sense of they don't know they don't believe in God, or they're not sure what to make. No, thank you. But boy, do they have a sense of the horizontal sacred. and among other places, that's in community. I have many students like that too. You know, I don't believe in God, but I sure like nature. And you got to kind of take them at their face value. You know, you get to choose your language. You get to choose your language. I see, let's see. Let's ask one more question here. Oh, I see Sherry Kling, and she's the director of Process and Faith. And we're so glad you're here with us, Sherry. She's smart as can be and a theologian in her own right. And she's also a really good musician. and if you ever hear Sherry saying, you will be transported, you will be transported. But it reminds me, Sherry, you know, some people can have relationships with music that is kind of a primary context in which they experience something sacred. I bet you've known many people like that, or at least some.
Yeah, you know, I was just also gonna say that there are, you know, researchers who look at the power of religious experience, and they might use the word religious experience, they might say mystical experience, but there are some who talk about ecstatic experience, and in that they will put things like the arts and nature, and it's where there's just a sense that in that encounter we are kind of transcending our limited personal self and sort of being held in something that feels sacred, that's connected to, that there's some kind of wholeness or some kind of connectedness that's experienced that carries some kind of meaning and importance that goes beyond our personal little self, our personal little psychological troubles and emotional pains and struggles, that it lifts us sort of to a perspective that's transpersonal, that's above that. So there are a lot of researchers who are not, you know, they talk about the horizontal sacred and not just talking about the religious experience has to be with this vertical sacred, that it can be in this horizontal sense. But yeah, I mean, I certainly have felt transported, you know, when I'm either playing music or being part of listening to music. There's you know, it just sort of carries us to another place.
And sound, you know, in general, I think of Islam again, and I think about the sounds of the Quran. Not simply the meanings of the words, but the sweetness of the sound, and the role that sound plays in helping us feel connected in so many ways. Let's take a little turn. Have any of you noticed that we live in a digital age and that people spend a lot of time in front of screens, iPhone screens, computer screens, this, that, or the other? They call it screen culture. And scholars suggest there's actually a shift in how we think and feel, even a shift in our brains. Given the time we now spend on screens, it's harder for people to read, for example, because brains have been reprogrammed where you can scroll on a screen, but it's harder to stay focused in an immersive way. It's harder to read a novel. And there's many studies that show that's the case these days. Do you feel that screen culture has affected our capacities for community, positively or negatively? Anybody want to say anything about that? We'll move on to compassion, but if you'd like to make an observation about the relationship between connections and screen culture, this would be a good time to make that. Anybody have thoughts? Yeah, Bev.
So I'm partly here because of a Facebook group, Jay, that you're involved with. I'm in Philadelphia. If this was not happening virtually, I would not have the opportunity to participate. So there's that. And there's also, goodness gracious, what would the pandemic have been if we were not able to connect in these kinds of ways? At the same time, what has happened to in-person faith communities as a result is something I think we're still discovering what will happen. That's about all that I have to say.
No, I hear you. Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else? Just any reflections, any thoughts? Jared.
Yeah, I think the screen culture and especially the social media aspect of it also has the opportunity to change our relationships to ourselves. We have this new mode of self-expression and new ways to kind of conceptualize ourselves, our identities through these profiles. And certainly easy for that to become sort of pathological, sort of image obsessed in this kind of clinging way. But there's also real ways of developing a new kind of self-consciousness and finding communities that may not have been so accessible otherwise, without that sort of vulnerability of presenting yourself in this kind of curated sort of way, but not inauthentic. And so, yeah, there's some good, there's some bad for sure.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Alan?
Yes. I just wanted to speak. It's kind of a mixed bag. There's some things that are great, even learning communities, which and formats that don't offer that are basically free as a result of internet interactions and things. And then there's also the shadow side where specifically social media platforms, that now a majority of people in the US rely on social media for news and other information. And their polarization is a major profit maker for social media platforms. And so one thing that I've seen in studying specifically in relating to diversity issues is that hate and incendiary speech and misinformation and disinformation are being spread at an incredible level. And they, I won't get into all the examples, but, they, a post that contains something that's very controversial, emotionally charged, receives up to 100 times more views and postings than a post that contains just accurate information. So, I just wanted to note that side of things as well.
Well, thank you, Alan. And we, Lynn and Dan, if it's okay, we're going to move on now because I think we promised to cover compassion, and I'm watching the clock, and I think we need to take that turn. Sophia, when she sent us her letter, she included a quote from Jainism, the religion of Jainism, Jainism. And that's where we get the notion of ahimsa, or nonviolence. And what is it like to live in a truly nonviolent way? And the leader of Jainism, a man named Mahavira, influenced Buddhism. It was a Jain who influenced Gandhi to lift up this notion of nonviolence as a way of living in the world. And a unique quality of Jainism is it thought if we're nonviolent, we need to really be nonviolent. And that means our nonviolence needs to be extended to whatever struggles to survive. And if there's something, if you try to catch something and it runs away from you, it struggles to survive. So the Jain teaching is that nonviolence goes all the way up and down. And it lifted up the ideal of a perfectly nonviolent life. And it would, from a Jain perspective, be vegetarian for sure. Animals seek to escape us. We don't want to inflict harm on them. We don't want to add to the suffering in the world. So I think one question, if you hear nonviolence as related to compassion, how far should compassion extend? How wide should our compassion be? What are the limits? If any. Now, I'll say a little further word about compassion. There have been psychological studies of what compassion involves, and it involves at least two things emotionally. The first one they call state sharing, and that is actually feeling the states, the inner states of another. So if I'm talking with Sophia and I sense her mood, I feel her feelings in some way through the tone of her voice, through her eyes. That's state sharing. It's direct, very direct. You feel the moods of another. You feel the feelings of another. By the way, that's a little process theology. They think even the Holy One, even God, is an ongoing act of feeling the feelings of others in a sympathetic way. All others. All others. The second dimension of compassion, though, is maybe a little easier for us. They call it perspective taking. And so it's imagining ourselves inside the skin, inside the body of another, and getting a sense for how the world looks from their point of view, walking in their moccasin, so to speak, and letting that have an effect on you because you've taken their perspective on. So let me just kind of throw it out there. How wide can compassion be, or should it be? How important is it? And how wide should perspective taking be? Any thoughts? Does this raise any questions for anybody? Or reflections? David?
Just wanted to say that I think that the limit of compassion should be at the hands of the one whom we are trying to take their perspective and to try to feel their state feelings. And I think that to respect autonomy, that is the outer limit. But short of that, I think the net needs to be pretty broad.
I'm going to come back to you, David, in a second. That's such an interesting remark, and I do want to come back. But anybody else want to just talk about possibilities of compassion, limits of compassion? Anybody else have a thought on that? I think, go ahead, whoever was about to speak.
Real quickly, this is Len. I think that it's almost like a leavening, a way of being or relating that can change the energy in relationships of all sorts. And so I think of it as sort of the ultimate power that is not bound by time and connects in all kinds of ways that we're not aware of when we're not in that, not looking through that window of compassion. So I guess that's one of the things. I think that it's sort of the ultimate power that connects us at a deeper level and changes our awareness and then our actions.
Lynn, thank you. Lynn, do you think that compassion is the ultimate reality?
I would say maybe the source of life, the life force.
I don't want to put you in a metaphysical spot there, Lynn. I'm just curious. I like the way you posed it. Bill and Mary Beth, would you like to share your thought about preemptive kindness? Would you do so?
The first thing that came to my mind was the situation between Russia and Ukraine. And as we're learning about what we can do, that God, if you want to include the idea of horizontal, but God can't always, he depends on us sometimes to build relationships, to demonstrate relationship building and kindness and thinking inside other people and the planet. But it's like what's happened is things have gotten so out of hand that now people are trying to protect their own family from atrocities. But it makes me think of how our little circle of impact in our own communities and maybe some ways overseas, I'm not quite sure how, but building some sort of support for international understanding that could maybe help those in power to see a way to further their ends without this type of violence. So I'm just thinking that a whole generation needs to think proactively of building relationships and understanding where someone else is coming from.
Can that be, how is that learned? How do people learn?
Oh, man. Well, we need to encourage each other. As you've said before, we need to listen carefully. And in a young person, if they have an interest in other cultures, we need to really encourage them to go deeper and see what little ways, maybe a pen pal or international agriculture organizations or climate change organizations, plus from the what we're learning from the Center for Process Thought is we are all connected, whether we realize it or not. And any ways that we can make a positive impact on the environment here in the United States could in reality affect the geosphere or cosmos in another country.
So I think we're talking about pockets of compassion in small places that set an example and actually set an energy, put out an energy. Anybody else? Sophia, did you have a comment you wanted to make?
Well, I can make one if you want me to. I would say my teacher always says, if you're good to those who are good to you, what good are you? And I was reading the website Spirituality and Practice last night, and it defined compassion as a gentle quivering of heart or opening up your heart to others' pain and suffering. Well, our heart is always open towards people that we like or agree with or think alike. The real challenge comes when we are dealing with people that we don't like and we don't agree with. And honestly, to me, that's where compassion starts.
I bet there's some people among us now who can think of some people they don't like. And we've just received an invitation challenge from our teacher, Sophia. Try that one out. Try that. I see Alan and Dan with your hands signaled. Did you have a comment? And then we're going to bring things to a close.
That was left over from my earlier comment.
A leftover hand. Okay, Dan.
I just think it's so fascinating that these two words, connection and compassion, are together in this lesson, because they're so interconnected themselves. And I'm thinking really practically about what Sophia was mentioning, exercising compassion and experiencing the pain of others. I was reading a little book called The Secret of Forgiveness that talks about the process of overcoming pain. And it begins with giving ourselves permission to feel the pain, because we often don't give ourselves permission to do that. And then finding the courage to express it to a trusted friend. And that trusted friend is someone who will accept us, will not judge us, will not criticize us, will not try to fix us, but is basically a space where we can be fully expressive of the pain we've been through. And then that friend will validate that pain and say, yes, if I had been in that position, I would have felt that too. And those three steps set us up to let go of the feelings that so often roll around in our brains like gerbils on a wheel. And isn't that holding of that space, a real expression of compassion, and its healing effect is so profound. That's all I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes, I appreciate that. David made a remark. Oh, Steve, go ahead, please.
I'm not even sure if I recall what was on my heart, but I keep hearing connection and compassion, and really they're also intertwined together. And within it, I keep hearing respect.
Yeah.
It's all about respect. It's about re-seeing someone else, some other ideas, and really we need to re-see it because we have made a judgment concerning someone or some group. And so within all of this, compassion to me is suffering with another, being present, suffering with another, and having that connection. And I know it's all kind of flowing together. I don't know if it's making sense, but earlier when we were talking about birds, I love getting out early in the morning and just listening and watching the birds. I love planting flowers and working in the dirt, and I love music. And all of those things, I feel what they do, they allow me to connect. They allow me to, and some have said, build bridges. And every time I think of building bridges, what I feel within myself is, no, I'm not building a bridge. What's happening is a bridge is being revealed.
That's
a bridge
interesting.
that is already there is being revealed. The connection is being revealed. The compassion is being revealed. And we are experiencing oneness, that we are already one. And so I don't know if all that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, Steve. And there's some head nods as you say that. So let Viv and then Sophia to bring our meeting to a close. Viv, did you have a comment or a thought?
Jay, I have a question. When you say the vertical sacred is with something more than you or me, many of the things that we've been talking about
That's right.
are more than me. So are you going to ultimate with the more than, or what with that one?
I think that I was going to something ultimate. Okay. But I think the a very practical question is this. If you pray, when you pray, do you feel like there's something listening, someone listening, that there's somehow a receptacle that's more than you, that has some kind of unity, someone listening? Okay, that would be a sense of the vertical sacred.
Okay, thanks.
That would be the vertical sacred. One way of thinking about it. You can also understand it in less personal terms as a kind of transpersonal source, an energy of which everything is a manifestation, but it's more than everything. You can go either of those two directions. But we've been on horizontal today, and it's been so nice. And I want to note that David sent a comment saying there's really a lot of research now on perspective taking for out groups. How did you put it, David? Can you say it real quickly?
Yes, for groups that we may have negative stereotypes that are not part of our group, right? And so we may be more judgmental and siloed towards those people politically, whatever it might be. I use the instance of racism, but perspective taking really getting into behind the eyes of the other and seeing the world from their perspective as best as one can. Really can begin to overcome some of those knee-jerk, emotional, not very well thought out reactions we have towards people that are not compassionate. And I've just run across a few good pieces. And the other thing about that is being perspective taking and compassion. It's not, they have looked at it. It doesn't just lead to socially positive responding. It's more than that, and it doesn't just lead to more liberal political attitudes. It's truly something about the relationship that is
interesting.
That's being envisioned.
Thanks, David.
Thank you,
Sophia. Thank you.
Yeah, let's bring our class to close with this. We're almost on time, a couple of minutes left. I think I would like to share story from a Hasidic rabbi as our closing prayer today, a story that highlights both these practices, compassion and connection in it. So there was once this old Hasidic rabbi who asked his students, how do we know when the night has ended and the day has begun? So the first and the brightest of his students offered an answer and quickly said, Rabbi, when I look out of my window and I look at the fields and I can distinguish between my field and the field of my neighbor, that's when I know that the night has ended and the day has begun. And the rabbi said, no. So a second student raised the hand and offered an answer and said, could it be when I see an animal in the distance and I can tell whether it is a sheep or if it is a dog? That's when I can tell when it's the day which has started. And the rabbi says again, no. Think again. When do you know that the night has ended and the day has begun? So a third student raised the hand and said, is it when we look out at a tree in distance and can tell if it's a fig tree or a pear tree? And that's when I know that the night has ended and the day has begun. And the rabbi again said, no. Then what is it? Asked all the students. How do we know that the night has ended and the day has begun? And the rabbi said, it is when you look at the face of any man or any woman and see that it is your brother or your sister. Because if you cannot do that, then it is still night for you. And your sun has not come up. So with this said, we'll see you all next week, Wednesday at noon, with 2 new spiritual practices, E for enthusiasm and F for forgiveness. The recording of this class will be uploaded on our YouTube channel tonight. You can find it on our YouTube channel or on our Facebook. Peace, salam, and shalom.
Shalom.